introduce Professor Esther Duflo. Esther is Abdul Latif Jamil Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics in the Department of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And she is also the founder and the director of the Jamil Poverty Action Lab, GPAL. Her research focuses, as all you know, on microeconomic issues in developing countries, including household behavior, education, access to finance, policy evaluation, and importantly also health. Esther has received various academic honors. I'm not going to list all of them for brevity. Let me just mention the Dan David Award laureate in Future Dimension in 2013, the Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year Award for Poor Economics, a Radical Rethinking on a Way to Fight Global Poverty in 2011, the David Kershaw Award for the Association of Public Policy Analysis and Management, the John Bates Clerk Medal for the Best Economist under 40, and many others. Esther is also an National Bureau for Economic Research Associate and serves on the board of the Bureau for Research and Economic Analysis and Development, BRED. She is also the founding editor of the American Economic Journal's Applied Economics. So, again, I'm very happy to have this opening keynote speech by Esther. And let me say something a bit personal. When we were discussing about who to invite for this speech, the name of Esther Duflo came to our mind. And I have to thank Eliana to have been able to put in contact with her. Then I went browsing on the web, and I found rather famous TED short video of Esther. And I went through the video, and really it completely convinced me that it was exactly the very good choice we could have done. Also because that video really explained the importance of randomized experiments and in general experiments in developing countries, making a parallel for the benefits it made to medicine. So it was the confirmation, it was the right choice, and also the opportunity for me to use that video in a number of my classes. So thank you, Esther, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, thank you very much. Normally I would feel bad to stand between you and Milan, but it's pretty hot outside and it's pretty cool here. I think I can talk and talk and talk until the sun goes down, and it's nice to be outside again. I'm very pleased to be here. I love coming to Milan, and that's why I didn't take very long to accept this invitation. Another reason is that I was intrigued by the title, which I'm glad to see. When I saw the title, when I arrived, I was like, oh, did I botch it? But then I think when I was invited, that was still the title, and then you changed the... I was very intrigued and interested by the title because nutrition is actually something that I've done a little bit of work on, but I'm not going to talk much about it today. But I also teach religiously to undergraduate students and graduate students every year. At the very beginning of our class, this is one of the first things we teach because it's really a core issue of development economics. And it is a topic on which my own thinking has evolved very recently on the basis of the evidence that started to come up in the last couple of years. So getting an occasion to rethink for myself and then for you and then down the line for my students at MIT, what we know today on this issue is actually very, very valuable. So nutrition is actually, you wouldn't think it actually is a political subject. It's a politically charged subject. I think that's probably a reason why it's the title of the expo this year. And one of the symptoms that it's an economically charged subject is that there is some slight spy novel thing associated to it. As development economists, we have the spy novel thing that we can. They are not like the most exciting, but still. The magazine, The Economist, has a very interesting article this week, which is called Of Secrecy and Stunting, which immediately caught my attention. And the secrecy in question relates to a report that UNICEF put together on behalf of the government of India based on data that they collected that has been ready since October, but that the government of India has not released. The economists contend it has not released it because it doesn't like the results. And why doesn't it like the results? Well, it shows some progress against stunting in India, which in itself is good news because, as Eliana pointed out, a large fraction of the world's malnourished children are in India, and as a proportion, the level of undernutrition is much worse in India than in sub-Saharan Africa, which is quite surprising. So, in a sense, the headline result is good news. There is some progress in malnutrition. It's only 30% of the children who are malnourished today, and not 42.5. But I think what may have given the government a pause is that the progress is less large. There is less progress in BJP-run states. The BJP runs the country, but different states are run by different parties, and the BJP-run states show less progress. And in particular, Gujarat, which is a state where the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, hailed from, has one of the lowest rate of progress, despite, of course, the fast economic growth that it's most well known for. So, according to The Economist, that's the reason why they don't want to release this report. And that is something that probably makes Mr. Modi quite uncomfortable, or at least makes the handler of Mr. Modi uncomfortable enough that they don't want to broach the subject with him. Although maybe he doesn't mind, because after all, he doesn't seem to think that nutrition is an economic subject. This again comes from this very interesting article from the magazine. Asked about child nutrition in Gujarat in 2012, Mr. Modi told the Wall Street Journal that it was a middle-class vegetarian state. And that, quote, the middle class is more beauty-conscious than health-conscious. If a mother tells her daughter to have milk, they'll have a fight. She'll tell her mother, I don't want to drink milk, I'll get fat. So that is basically Modi saying, nutrition has nothing to do with economics. It has nothing to do with the economic success of the state. It has everything to do with preferences. Leave it aside. So what I want to ask today is, in a sense, if we can take him seriously for 2 minutes, or at least if we can take seriously the possibility that we should take him seriously for 2 minutes, and ask whether, in fact, economics has anything to do with what people eat, or whether that's not the case. And the reason why I'm going to ask this question is that's a question on which I'm going to try to make you aware of the arc that my own thinking has gone through in this regard, and the evolution that I've gone through and where I end up. So nutrition productivity in excess is, of course, a workhorse of development economics. It's in 1958 that Deepak Majumdar, in his dissertation at the LSE, first theorized the possibility of nutrition-related poverty trap, where someone who doesn't eat enough is not very productive, therefore doesn't earn enough money, therefore doesn't eat enough, therefore stays unproductive. It was formalized in the 1987 very classic paper by Dasgupta and Ray. And the key ingredient in that paper, and the key ingredient, in fact, in any poverty trap model, but for that paper is the capacity curve, what they call the capacity curve, which is a mapping which goes from income today and income tomorrow via a relationship between income today and nutrition on the one hand, and of nutrition and productivity on the other hand. So you need to have something like that, what we call in poor economics the S-shape, where there is a moment where the relationship between nutrition and productivity, nutrition today and work capacity, which converts in their model into income again because it's a piece rate economy, is fairly flat. So this zone is the zone where you are accumulating the calories that you need for your, just to exist. So if you eat more over this range, you don't become much more productive, but then at some point you've had like the 1,200, 1,400 calories, 1,500 maybe, that you need to actually function, and any extra calorie would have a much higher marginal impact on your productivity. The shape of the curve is important. This curve, in order to generate a poverty trough, needs to be steep enough that it's going to intersect the 45-degree line from below. So it needs to be at some point really, really steep. And that relationship is a double mapping. It's a double mapping between your income today and how much you eat, and then how much you eat and your income tomorrow. So the empirical relevance of the Dasgupta-Andre theory has been the subject of debate for as long as it has existed, and in some sense for longer than it has existed, because people have discussed both sides of this relationship for a long time. Today I want to focus mostly on the relationship, the causal relationship going from income to nutrition. And I'm not going to talk much about the relationship between nutrition and productivity, but I assume this is going to be part of what you're going to do in this session. I'll just have one slide on it, which I'll put together, because the reason why I'm not going to talk much about it today is that there is surprisingly little to say. Given how fundamental this question is, you'd think we would know. And at some level, we know the biology of it, but I think we know very little about the economics of it. We now know, we have plenty of good evidence that nutrition in utero affect long-term outcomes, including productivity, particularly micronutrients. We also have, I think, good evidence that nutrition in childhood affects both education and long-term productivity. The deworming study by Michael Kramer and co-authors, the iron supplementation study, recent one, for example, by Erika Field and co-authors, shows that quite clearly. What we do not have, surprisingly, is several, in fact, we don't really have any large-scale, well-done study of the impact of better nutrition in adulthood on contemporaneous productivity that tells us what to do. And it could be because it is actually quite hard to change the nutrition level of people, and therefore it's hard to get an intervention that gives you enough of a first stage in that. So there's a nice study by Duncan Thomas and co-author on Indonesia, which is not yet published, but where they're giving iron supplement to people, but they literally have to go, at every doorstep, making sure people get the iron supplement. So the studies are cumbersome. It's therefore an open agenda for research, but not something that I'm going to talk about much today. What I want to talk about today is the other relationship, the relationship between income and nutrition. And that's a very age-old question, goes back to Engel, writing budget of poor families, goes back to the late 19th century in France. Social anthropologists of the time, in some sense, starting to do budgets and trying to understand what people do with their money. So what's the elasticity of calories or other nutrients, or micronutrients, protein, anything you want, with respect to total expenditure? Total expenditure being here a proxy for permanent income. So it is a relationship. The reason why it's an age-old question is that it's important. It's also because it's a difficult question, so we haven't had a final answer to it. It is very difficult to estimate this relationship correctly with observational data. So comparing people, if I have a data set with a bunch of people and I know how much they spent on food and I know how much they spent in general on everything, this is really not enough for me to say what's the elasticity of calorie consumption, say, with respect to total expenditure. There are many issues. There are several measurement issues. The first one is that how much you spend on food is not how many calories you're eating. As people become richer, they eat more, more calories, more nutrient, but also they eat better in the sense of better tasting, not necessarily more nourishing, but better tasting, so more expensive calories. So if you want to measure nutrition elasticity, you need to have a good measure of nutrition, which require very, very, very detailed surveys on what various food items people consume, which are not in the typical consumption surveys, which are in very few consumption surveys. That's one measurement issues. Other measurement issues relate to food that people eat outside their home. For example, workers who eat on the farm of their employers, food that people give away to other people, food that people waste, etc. So for all of these reasons, there is not a very clear mapping between how much people spend on food and how much calories they actually consume. And that is, of course, compounded by the complicated issues of intra-household distribution of the calories that are being spent. So that's the first set of problems. A second set of problems is unobserved variables that can create a correlation between how much people eat and how much how productive they are. And the third problem is an issue of endogeneity, because of course we have a double mapping between nutrition and productivity. So as much as income affects nutrition, nutrition in turn could affect income because it makes you more productive. But we don't even know exactly in what direction this endogeneity goes. On the one hand, if people are mostly doing physical work, then more work requires more calories, which means that any relationship between, any cross-sectional relationship between how many calories people eat and how much they spend in total is an upward bias relationship of the causal effect of food on nutrition. On the other hand, as people become other richer, maybe they start doing sedentary work, which require less calorie again. Or maybe they have better sanitation, they lose less calories through diarrhea or other disease, so they require less calories. So the sign of the bias could invert. So in other words, the cross-sectional data, even if we could estimate this correlation, doesn't tell us much about the causal effect of income on nutrition. Nonetheless, people have had, tried to estimate angle curve for a very long time. You can click. So this room is too sophisticated for me. It involves my hyperlink need human help. So you can click on it. Great. So you can see this is a beautiful paper by Angus Deaton and Subramanian, who looks at, they use the National Sample Survey in India. They solve a lot of the measurement problem in particular because the NSS is a very detailed survey on consumption. And they show this very nice non-parametric relationship, happens to be linear, but it's estimated non-parametrically between total calorie consumed and total, and the log of total calories and the log of per capita consumption. You can go back. The relationship appears to be mostly linear. So the elasticity, you saw that in the graph, the relationship appears to be mostly linear. So the elasticity seems to be pretty much constant. And it's never above 1 in the case of Deaton and Subramanian. And what they also show, you can click here on the figure, that there is a strong relationship between the price per calorie and total expenditure. And this is the substitution I was talking about. You can show the figure, click the figure. You can see that relationship, if I had inverted the labels, you could see that one is the other. They almost have the same slope. The relationship between the calories, log of calorie consumed and log of total expenditure per capita. And this is a log of price per calorie and log of total expenditure per capita. So again, this is purely cross-sectional. There is nothing causal there. You can go back. But what it suggests is that when you become 10% richer, this is very easy to remember this result. When you become 10% richer, or when poor people in Maharashtra in the 1980s become 10% richer, they spend 7% more on food, and half of the 7% goes towards eating more calories, and half goes towards eating more expensive calories. So this is where we were when I first started learning development economics, I think Eliana and I sat through the same class where this was taught. With all of the caveat that I was talking about and some hand waving that there's not much we can do about it. And for a long time, that's kind of what it remained, because people were not all that excited about this question, I think. So there was not that much research done on that. Then there is a second beautiful detailed paper, this time with Jean Drèze, looking at what happened over time in India. The India case is really fascinating, not only for the sheer size of the country and the number of people who are undernourished, but also for the tremendously bizarre history of the past few decades. So India is a country that has become richer and richer, and just in case you're not specialist of India, the level of poverty has also gone down. So it's not that it's just inequality that has gone up and the Ambani of the world are richer and richer. It's the countries where people have become richer, there are fewer poor people, and the poor people are less poor. By all dimensions, the countries have become more prosperous. And yet, what we find in India over time is a clear decline in the calories that people consume. People spend less on food, less money on food, and they eat less. They just eat less calories. From a level of nutrition that was inadequate to start with about 30 years ago, they are now eating less. So that is very strange. So one first question we can ask is, well, we just saw the beautiful angle curve showing that there is a positive relationship between food and nutrition. So what has happened to it? Has it gone away? And what they show is that it has not gone away. You can click on the figure. What happened to it is that the angle curve actually has been sliding down. Can I see the figure? You can see the angle curves over time. So the highest one are the ones that are the oldest one. So 1983 rural, and also the bunch of lowest ones are all the urban ones. So the urban people eat less. So within the urban sector, it's gone down from 1983 to 87 to 93 to 99 to 2004. And in the rural area, same thing has been going down. For the most part, it's not tilted. There's one that's a little bit more steeper than the others. But for the most part, they stay like parallel, but they're just going down, down, down. That's why people end up eating less, because they become richer, so they travel along the angle curve. But at the same time, the angle curve is sliding on them, so it's swimming upstream, if you want. You can go back. So how can we reconcile an upward sloping cross-sectional angle curve, which is what we see here year by year by year, and at the same time a downward drift as the country's income increase? So one possibility, the first one that would come to your mind if you have followed the worldwide story on nutrition, is that food prices have gone up, or the relative price of food has gone up. And that's not a story for these graphs, because they predate the big increase in food prices. The big increase in food prices is from 2005, essentially, and this is all from before. So this is really an early 2000 stories, the food prices, and this is not something we see here. So I think that they rightly put away this hypothesis. A possibility is that over time in India, many more goods become available that were not available before. Cell phone is one clear example, televisions, consumer goods of various kinds, and people want variety. This is something that I'm very partial to as an explanation, and I'll come back to that. Their own explanation is that the calorie requirements are going down over time, both because of better health infrastructure and sanitation infrastructure, which means people are less sick, because people have fewer children. So for women, childbearing is very calorie intensive, and people have, and the work is more sedentary. So people, don't need as much calories to do their work, so they eat less. One of the problems I have with that explanation is that nutritional status is still really poor in India. So it is assuming that somehow people are very content with this very bad nutritional status, and if they lose less calories, then they are going to replace less calories, and that's what it is. So that assumes people are content with a nutritional status that most of us would consider quite poor. In fact, maybe it's not the case, because we see with the recent data from the UNICEF coming from that survey called RSOC, that finally it's improved. So till not long ago, that's where my graduate class stopped. On that puzzle, that's what we had. And on this puzzle, which is, is it possible that the angle curve is actually flat, that there is no causal relationship between income and nutrition at the individual level, that the reason why we have a combination of an appearance of an upward angle curve and the fact that it's going down is people become richer, so people mostly stay in place. When you compare them, people who eat more earn more, but it's just an omitted variable or endogeneity. Over time tells us the truth, which is in fact the angle curve is flat. So I didn't know, but that is something that is certainly compatible with this data. So the in-time time series evidence suggests that movement along the cross-sectional angle curve probably do not identify the effect of income on demand for nutrition. We knew that at a theory level, but that suggests that it's something to be taken seriously. Of course, the time series would suggest a backward bending angle curve, that people eat less and less as they become richer, but that is also misleading because many other things have changed over time in India, including the fact that there are more things available to buy. But still, among many economists, including myself, there was this seeds of doubt that perhaps an increase in income would have no or little causal effect on nutritional improvements. And these seeds of doubt in many people, maybe not so much development economists or the rest of the world, were reinforced by a very influential paper by Jensen and Miller on the Giffen good, where they were more interested in other aspects, but by the by, a lemma in that paper, so to speak, says something very puzzling about the income effect on nutrition. So what is that paper? That paper is a price experiment in China. So what they do is subsidize the staple food in 2 regions for randomly selected households. And they survey food consumption after a few months in that regime. So in one region, Hunan, they subsidize rice because rice is a staple. And the other region, Guangzhou, they subsidize wheat, because wheat is the staple. At least in one region, so first if you look at if you click on the Hunan link, please. So the table is not great to read, but you can follow my lead. The table, the row of interest here is this percent subsidy rice. It tells you when rice subsidy, when rice becomes cheaper, how much more rice do you consume, or how much more cereal do you consume? And the headline of their paper, which is why it's a Giffen good paper, is that as rice becomes cheaper, you eat less of it. So in other words, rice is a Giffen good. And you eat less fruit and vegetable as well. You eat more seafood. And you eat less pulses. So basically, people substitute out of rice and other cheap calories towards these very expensive calories, which is seafood. You can go back. And then click on table. And at least in Hunan, overall, what this leads to is that people eat fewer calories. And they also eat fewer protein, even though they eat more seafood. So as rice becomes cheaper, so the main source of calories become cheaper, people eat less calories. We can go back. So this is quite striking. Of course, that suggests that rice is a Giffen good. How can a good be a Giffen good? It can be the share of the budget has to be large. It has to have a very negative income effect, which compensates for a positive income effect. So the headline is that, oh, that's a Giffen good. We didn't know they existed. But that implies that the income effect on rice consumption, fine, but also on calorie consumption, because they find over a calorie, is negative. So the Jensen-Miller results are possible only if the angle curve is backward bending. So again, going back for a while, this is what we had. That was the one causal effect available from the randomized studies of the causal effect of income on calorie consumption, a little bit indirect, but that the income effect would have to be negative. Of course, there are caveats to this study. It's a study that is a very short-term decrease, so people may be using the windfall to have good food while it's available, because they know it's going away after some time. These are urban people, they might not be that poor. So it sort of opened the question whether this is a new normal. The Jensen-Miller identifies something that is completely different from what we believed, or whether it's an exceptional result. So this is why now we know more. We in fact know that as of today, and as of very recently, thanks to a bunch of studies that have come up in the last year or few months, we know that the Jensen-Miller result is an exception. That in fact, in several now well-identified randomized controlled trials, we find pretty large positive income elasticity of calorie consumption, or food expenditure actually, with some inkling that it also goes for calorie consumption. So this is really what has kind of the arc of I was talking of the arc of my thinking on the issue is, okay, we thought the angle curve was upward sloping, and then there is some moment of floating, that maybe that's actually not the case. Now I'm back to thinking that actually the world is the way I thought it was, like when I first started studying development. So there are two sources of data that I'm going to rely on to make that point. One is an experiment where research, like actually an NGO called Give Directly, went around giving direct grants to households in Kenya. So these are poor households. They're just given money using the M-Pesa phone transfer system with no string attached at all and no requirement of what to do with the money. And there was a randomized evaluation done by Jeremy Shapiro and Johannes Haushofer in the first draft of the paper is from 2013, which looks at a randomized experiment both within and across villages. So they randomized villages where the program was going to take place, and within eligible villages randomized the households, and then within the household they also have a series of other randomization, whether people got the money lump sum or by month, whether people got a little bit of money or a lot of money, whether women got the money or men got the money. They look at a number of outcomes of this experiment. It's a very nice paper in general, but the one thing I want to take away for the purpose of this talk is the result on food. And what you have here is two things. One is in blue and red, the cross-sectional angle curve. On the left axis is log expenditures on food. So this is not calories, this is expenditure on food. So that includes any substitution. But it's log expenditure on food. And on the right-hand side, you have log total expenditure per capita. And what you find is nice, almost straight line. They have no particular reason to be straight because they are non-parametric curve, but they happen to be almost straight. You see the treatment and the control group. The treatment group is blue. People eat a little more when they get the transfer than when they don't. But the slope is exactly the same. And what is particularly interesting is each of the colored dots is the average, represents the x-axis is the average total expenditure in this group, and the y-axis is the average food expenditure, both expressed in logs. The blue point is the control group. The red point is the treatment group. So you can see that you could estimate the elasticity by the ratio of the two sides of the triangle. But what you can see is that basically these 2 points are right on the lines. Likewise, all of the various colored points are the various treatment groups. And except for one here toward the right, they're all pretty much bunched also on these graphs. So whichever way you estimate the elasticity, what you can do then is to say, well, I'm going to compare the treatment group and the control group, or in fact, any of the treatment, of the various sub-treatment. I'm going to divide the impact that being in this group has on their food consumption by the impact that it has over being in their overall consumption, and that's going to give me the elasticity. And when you do that, you basically have an instrumental variable estimate, which is causal, which is completely purged of any bias coming from omitted variable or reverse relationship or anything. You have it here for food total, and you can see that the OLS, the slope that I showed you, is 1. So basically 10% more total expenditure, 10% more food expenditure. People are completely in step. The IV is a little less than 1, but not that much less than 1. It's 0.83, it's quite high. They are statistically different, but the IV is still quite high. And then when you look at various, then you can look at food expenditure from various kinds of foods, and you get the sense that there is some substitution. For example, the expenditure on meat and fish grows faster than the expenditure for cereals. But all of the elasticities are positive and are all pretty large. So this sample is a sample of poor rural people in Kenya, but in recent years goes back to show us, no, there is actually at least one group of people in Kenya that has pretty high nutrition income. This is expenditure, nutrition expenditure elasticity. So we were there, and then the question is whether it replicates. And here, one place where we have a replication now is 7 studies, 6 of which got published together last month in Science magazine, looking at an asset transfer to the ultra-poor. So it's not a cash transfer program, it's a program where the poor get a cow and some training to use the cow and all sorts of help. But the point is that this was a successful program in the sense that it improved people's level of livelihood. So people, as a result of this program, people were richer. I was involved in the evaluation of this program in 6 countries. So I'll show you the country in a moment, but 6 countries in several continents, and we all published them together in one study. This was a replication of an initial program by the NGO BRAC in Bangladesh, and the BRAC program has separately been evaluated as well by a team at the LSE with Oriana Bandiera and Robin Burgess. And the results are also very similar. So we now have 7 countries where we can do the same exercise. We can look at an exogenous increase in expenditure and look in total expenditure coming from an intervention and look at whether we have a corresponding increase in food expenditure or not. And what you find is that if you click on the elasticity button, this shows you the sort of headline results average across country. So one data point, one country. On average, the overall consumption went up from $80 to 80 plus 4.55, so that's an improvement of about 5%. And then if you look at the food consumption per capita per month, that improvement is $4 on a basis of 52. So if you do a ratio against a ratio, this actually would give you an elasticity that is slightly bigger than 1 on average for the countries. That was a year and a half after people got the asset. 3 years after people got the asset, the income gain, the expenditure gain persists and the food expenditure gain persists, and again with an elasticity slightly larger than 1. So here we are talking about expenditure, we are not talking about calories, so there is surely some substitution going away from, instead of eating cereals, eating meat or something like that, but the elasticity of food expenditure is actually even larger than what Deaton and Subramanian had estimated in the mid-80s. We can go back. And click gain in food security in most countries. Yeah, it's fine, I'll just do it myself. Oh no, it doesn't come. Yeah. These are the results for gain in food security. So this is standardized, and it shows you also the country. So it's Ethiopia, Ghana, Honduras, India, Pakistan, Peru. In every country, in both end line, we see an increase in food security. Food security is an index of people reporting the number of meals that they've skipped a day, the chance they've skipped a meal, etc. So we find that despite a relatively small increase in overall expenditure of the order of 5%, we have pretty large decrease in people saying they've skipped meal and pretty large increase in number of people who eat 3 square meals a day. Let's go back myself. So what this tells us is that, okay, we go back to something where, in fact, plain vanilla increase in expenditure stemming from intervention do lead to improvement in food expenditure. So the next question, which is related, is whether you could do more than that, whether the poor actually have a temptation not to eat much of to spend their extra money in other ways than food. And if it were the case, then could they be tricked into eating more by instead of giving them money, giving them food? So this is a question which is of policy interest because the transfer to the very poor in poor countries often take the form of grains or grain subsidies. And those are pretty disastrous policies from the point of view of efficiency because you lose enormous amount of food this way, both because some of it is eaten by rats and because the rest is stolen. So it can really only be justified under the belief that this will lead households to eat more. But of course, in a classical model, this wouldn't be the case because the transfers are typically inframarginal, at least for food in general. So we should not expect much impact on food consumption. Because if you're going to eat 50 kilos of rice and I subsidize 30 kilos of rice, then it makes no difference. The marginal price of rice has not changed as far as you're concerned. There may be some more consumption of some items which are particularly nutritive, for example, if they are part of the baskets, but people would not consume them otherwise. Or there may be a flypaper effect or another behavioral bias of some form. Those would have to be very large to compensate the deadweight loss of doing transfer this way. And here again, until very recently, we just didn't know. And now we kind of know. It makes no difference to give people money in the form of money or to give people money really in the form of food baskets. So one of the first papers to come out was by a graduate student at Stanford, which looks at the PAL program in Mexico, where he compares food basket to cash. And he finds that on average, it makes no difference on how much people eat. It makes no difference on the nutrients they get. And what is very interesting is that this is a complicated food basket which has items that people would not otherwise buy, like, for example, powdered milk. So it makes a big difference in how much powdered milk people eat. But it makes no difference in how much protein from milk people are getting. So people are smart enough to completely undo they are pushed in one direction because of the basket, but they are smart enough to undo it by getting less stuff. So they have more powdered milk, they have less yogurt. So that on average, not only for calorie in total, but nutrient by nutrient, it makes no difference. IFPRI has a series of studies that compare cash versus food vouchers in 4 countries, Ecuador, Uganda, Yemen, and Niger. And they find that in all countries except Niger, cash has either the same impact on food consumption or more impact than the equivalent in food and voucher. It's only in Niger where food basket improved dietary diversity more than money. And the reason is that there was very little food available, so people couldn't buy it. Cash is also everywhere. That's from the IFPRI studies, much more cost effective. So incidentally, it seems like it's a much better policy. But from our point of view, it also suggests that there is no behavioral mystery here. People know exactly what they are doing, and they have a pretty standard neoclassical behavior as far as food is concerned. So where does it leave us in terms of conclusion? The food chapter in Poor Economics was called Television is More Important Than Food. And I want to go back to that insight. What we find is that the cross-sectional measured elasticity is very similar for the poor as the marginal elasticity that comes from experiment, but that's sheer luck because we know that the cross-sectional elasticity is likely biased and likely biased upwards. So what may be happening is that other things matter a lot, and they become more available in some places than others. For example, they are more available in India than in Africa. For example, there are cell phones, and there are televisions, and there are toothpaste and stuff like that that you can get in India at a relatively cheap price. So maybe this is what people first buy. When it's available, they buy these other things that they want too. Television is more important than food came from this man that we met in Morocco, who told me, and I should have listened more carefully, he told me, I was asking him, if you had more money, what would you do? And he said, I'll buy more food. And then I asked him, if you had even more money, what would you do? And he said, I'll buy better tasting food. So that would have suggested I would have found a high income elasticity of food consumption, both in terms of expenditure and in terms of calories, because he first would have gotten more calories and then better tasting food. And then I looked at his home, and he has a TV and a VCR and all that, and I asked him about it, and he said, oh, but television is more important than food. So if I had looked at his budget, I would have found a low share of food in the budget. But on the other hand, I would have found a large marginal impact of any additional food transfer. And it doesn't go with the way we normally think about the poor as first eating and then doing other stuff. Maybe the ordering is different. People first do other stuff and then they eat. Which then we would have the type of food share that we see, which tend to be quite low. You can click on food share, where it's the average share of food in the budget, which are much lower overall. These are for people who are consuming less than $1 a day per capita. And you can see in India, like in Udaipur, 56% only. In Mexico, 49%. In Indonesia, 66%. And then it's much larger in a country like Papua New Guinea, 78%, or Timor-Leste, 77%, where maybe people don't have much else to do with their money. Can we go back? So maybe what we see is that people do other things, and then when they are done doing these other things, they start eating more. So we can have a combination of pretty low food share or pretty low cross-sectional elasticity, which are compensated for the fact that they are upward biased, but it doesn't mean that the marginal elasticity cannot be quite large over a range. So in a country like India, we have income growth, but at the same time as income growth, we have more and more diversity of goods, and the prices of things fall, and the demand for variety explodes. Maybe the media, television, etc., also offers the possibility of consuming various kinds of foods. So people sacrifice on food first, but then they realize that they sacrifice on food, so the marginal elasticity could be large over a range. So food may have been consciously sacrificed at the margin, and this could be undone by plain vanilla income transfer. So this suggests, and that's where I sort of end up in terms of my thinking, and I will leave you as well, that good old-fashioned income support, which is targeted at the poor in some ways, for example, by some self-targeting, could have a large impact on nutrition, and maybe much larger than I would have even thought a couple of years ago. Thank you very much.